When I paid for the entire wedding cake, they asked me to wait in the car while they took pictures. I stood behind the tinted glass, watching them smile. Matching dresses, holding hands, champagne. Someone even gave a toast and said, "We're all here, the people who truly matter." I didn't blink, didn't move, just sat there, with the receipt still folded in my purse. My name is Mandy. I'm 31st, middle child, quiet one, the forgettable one. I was always the helper, the extra pair of hands, the girl who came early to set up chairs and left late after scrubbing dishes no one thanked me for. My parents called me the stable one, which is just another word for invisible. I flew in that weekend on my own dime. 2 connecting flights, one of them delayed. I lost my bag in Denver. My dress arrived 2 days later, but the wedding wasn't 2 days later. It was that night. I borrowed shoes that pinched my toes, did my makeup in the airport bathroom, pulled my hair into a low bun so no one would notice the frizz. No one noticed anyway. I still smiled when I walked into the venue. Still hugged everyone like they'd missed me. Like they even remembered I was coming. My sister barely looked up. "Hey," she said, "grab a seat, we're doing photos soon." I brought a gift no one asked for. A hand-bound photo album, stitched with childhood pictures they hadn't seen in years. Each page labeled, decorated, laminated. I spent hours on it, cut the ribbon myself. They left it on the counter, unopened. Someone put their soda can on top of it. Condensation dripped through the pages by the end of the night. No one noticed. At dinner, they sat me next to the coat rack, across from a cousin I hadn't spoken to since high school. I asked him how he was doing. He shrugged, told me he sold vape pens now, asked if I was still doing that college thing. I graduated 6 years ago. I watched my mother dance with her favorite son. My father kept bragging about my younger brother's real estate license. "He's a natural," he said, "always been good with people." My brother had sold one house. To a cousin, he still lived in my parents' basement. My sister's new husband kept calling me Ella, even after I corrected him twice. Then he stopped talking to me altogether. No one asked where I'd flown from. No one asked where I was staying. No one offered me a ride. I'd rented my own car, paid for my own hotel, paid for the cake, paid for the gift, smiled through all of it. Then came the speech. My sister stood up, glass in hand. She smiled so wide, her jaw trembled. "I just want to thank everyone who's been here for me, who believed in me, who supported me through the hardest year of my life." Pause. She turned slowly, looking around the room. Her eyes met everyone's, everyone except mine. "And most of all," she said, "to my brother, my rock. Thank you for keeping me grounded and for helping me become who I am." Applause. I didn't move, didn't blink, just kept my hand on the table, feeling the condensation from someone else's glass soaking into my sleeve. Later, I asked if anyone needed help cleaning up. My aunt waved me away. "You've done enough," she said, as if I'd caused some kind of burden by simply being there. I went out to the porch, sat on the edge of the railing, feet curled into the wood. The air was thick. Cicadas screamed from the trees. I could hear laughter behind the screen door, clinks of glass, the low bass of music, every voice familiar, every one of them echoing from a life I had never quite belonged to. No one came out, not even when I stood, not even when I picked up my keys, still covered in glitter from a party I was never really invited to. No hugs, no "text me when you get home," not even a glance. I walked to the car, opened the door, sat for a few seconds with the engine off, stared at the steering wheel like it might answer a question I wasn't sure how to ask. Then I turned the key. The lights from the house shrank in the rearview mirror. And the farther I drove, the more it all felt like static. Memories buzzed like broken radio. That time I came home for Christmas and no one noticed I'd left early. The birthday card I mailed my mom, found unopened on a pile of coupons. The voicemail I left my sister last year, offering to help her move. She never replied. Said later she must have deleted it by accident. Accidents. Everything I did for them was an accident in their eyes. My kindness, oversight, my help, inconvenient, my love, unacknowledged. They never told me I disappointed them. They didn't have to. They just forgot me, again and again, until I learned how to disappear before they could do it for me. I thought maybe I'd cry, but I didn't. I drove back to my hotel in silence, took off my shoes at the door, turned off the light, laid down on top of the covers, still wearing the same wrinkled dress, and stared at the ceiling until the air conditioner kicked on and made me feel like I was finally somewhere else. I didn't send a message the next morning, didn't post a photo, didn't say thank you, didn't wait for someone to ask where I'd gone. They wouldn't notice, and even if they did, they wouldn't ask why. I didn't slam the door, I didn't say goodbye, I just left, and no one came after me. The airport was half empty when I landed. I didn't tell anyone I'd come home. Not that it mattered. No one was waiting, no one asked. I carried my suitcase down 2 flights of stairs to my apartment. The building smelled like dust and metal. The hallway light flickered, then gave up. I walked in the dark. My apartment was small, quiet, the kind of place people called temporary. But for me, it was the first place that ever felt like mine. No one had ever visited. No family pictures on the wall. Just books, notebooks, folders with labels that only meant something to me. I took the wrinkled dress out of my suitcase, folded it once, put it in the back of my closet, and I didn't think about the wedding again. At least, not out loud. I went to work the next day, didn't miss a shift, didn't speak about the weekend. No one asked. I worked front desk at a gym from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m., then took the train downtown to tutor high schoolers for 3 hours, graded their papers on the ride home, clocked in at a bookstore on Saturdays, cleaned Airbnbs on Sundays. I was never still, didn't give myself time to be, because when I was still, I remembered the porch, the silence, the photo album with soda stains on the cover. I deleted their numbers, not out of hate, out of survival. I stopped checking their pages, unfollowed birthdays, turned off memories, let silence bloom. At night, I took online classes with headphones on, courses in business, marketing, design, UX, copywriting. 1 hour turned into 4, 4 turned into dawn. Sleep was optional, progress wasn't. I taught myself how to build websites, watched tutorials at double speed, learned the difference between branding and identity, how to write emails that made people click, how to sell what didn't yet exist. I didn't tell anyone. Not my coworkers, not the girl I split rent with, not even the one friend I still saw once a month, when we had time to pretend we weren't exhausted. My phone stayed quiet. They didn't call, not once. No, how are you? No, are you okay? Not even a forwarded meme or an accidental like. It was like I'd never existed, which honestly was nothing new. Only this time, it didn't hurt. It just confirmed what I'd always known. If I disappeared tomorrow, they'd remember me 3 days later because someone forgot to return my charger. I kept moving, rented a co-working space, brought my own coffee in a thermos so I wouldn't have to speak to anyone. Filed my business name, Quiet North, no story behind it. Just 2 words I liked, 2 things I never had. I didn't post updates, didn't brag, didn't share screenshots or client reviews, but I kept building. At night, I dreamed in code, woke up thinking about color palettes, sketched logos on napkins, started saying no to things that didn't pay me in money or peace. I replaced my furniture one item at a time. Old desk out, new one in, saved for a better chair, a monitor, a rug. Each thing I bought was a tiny rebellion. I made my own world, one where I didn't have to explain myself, one where no one rolled their eyes when I spoke, where no one told me to lower my standards or be more realistic, where I could be too much and not enough and still be okay. I got an email one afternoon from a company in Berlin. A client liked my portfolio, asked if I could design their new site in 6 weeks. I said yes. Then I stayed up for 3 days straight, figuring out how to actually do it. And I did, and they paid me, more than my family ever believed I was worth. I smiled at my screen, then turned it off and sat in the dark. Didn't celebrate, didn't call anyone. I didn't need witnesses. A year passed, then 2. I forgot birthdays on purpose, blocked group texts, muted guilt. Every now and then a message would slip through. From a cousin, a mutual friend, a church lady who somehow still had my number. How are you? Haven't seen you around. You should come visit. Your mom was asking about you. I didn't answer. Some things don't deserve answers. My mother's voice would sometimes play in my head when I worked late. Why are you always doing too much? Maybe if you weren't so sensitive. We never asked you to help. Number they never asked, but they always expected. I remember once, I was 15, made dinner for the whole family when my parents were sick. No one said thank you. My sister complained the pasta was cold. My brother knocked over the sauce, and I still washed every plate. That girl doesn't exist anymore. I left her somewhere in the aisle between cleaning supplies and frozen dinners. She screamed once, then went quiet. Now I only answer to myself. I moved into a bigger apartment, painted the walls white, put plants on every windowsill. None of them died. I bought a filing cabinet for client contracts, a safe for savings, a shelf for things I never thought I'd own. Books with my name in the acknowledgments, photos from cities I'd never thought I'd visit. A letter from a client that ended with, "You made this dream real." I looked at it sometimes, not for validation, just to remember that someone once saw me. Not because I begged them to, but because I did something worth seeing. 3 years in, I hit 6 figures. The kind of money my family assumed only happened to other people. Men, mostly. Men with suits and firm handshakes. Not women who sat in silence and made magic from keyboards. Still, I told no one. Because success doesn't need applause, it just needs space. I blocked their numbers one by one, not out of spite, just closure. They weren't cruel, not always. They just never saw me. Only what I failed to become in their eyes. So I stopped letting them look. And in that quiet, I became. Not louder, not shinier, just real. I didn't have revenge in my heart, didn't want them to suffer, didn't fantasize about rubbing it in. I just wanted peace, and now I had it, even if no one else knew. The message came on a Tuesday, 2:17 p.m. from my brother's fiancée. A number I didn't recognize. "Hey, sorry to be the one to tell you, your dad's in the hospital. They don't know if it's his heart or something else. Thought you'd want to know." No punctuation, no follow-up. I stared at the screen, read it twice, didn't move. The sun kept shining across the hardwood floor. The kettle kept hissing. Nothing changed. I made tea, checked my calendar, 3 client calls, 2 deadlines, none of them about him. I didn't answer. 3 days passed, another message, this time from my sister. "We don't know if he's stable. They won't give answers. Can you come? I think he wants to see you." She didn't say my name, just you, like I was still a stranger in their mouth. I booked a flight, window seat, didn't pack much. I hadn't been back in over 3 years. Nothing in me missed it. The streets, the houses, the overgrown hedges, all looked exactly as I remembered, small, gray, slightly disappointed in themselves. I rented a car, paid for everything myself, again. The hospital smelled like old paper and cheap soap. People moved slowly, as if healing was a kind of drowning. I walked into the room. He looked smaller, the kind of small that doesn't go away. He opened his eyes, squinted like he was trying to place me, then smiled. "Mandy," he said, like it meant something. He reached for my hand. I let him hold it. His grip was weak. He used to crush apples with one hand, used to yell from the porch when dinner was late, used to talk about pride like it was something we owed him. Now he just looked tired. "I'm glad you came," he said. I nodded. We didn't talk much. I asked if he needed anything. He said no. Then my mother walked in, still wearing the same perfume, still carrying herself like she hadn't done anything wrong. She smiled, but her eyes were afraid. She reached to hug me. I didn't move. The silence between us stretched, elastic, unforgiving. She pulled her hand back, sat down in the corner like a student called to the principal's office. "We didn't know how to reach you," she said. "You changed your number." I didn't answer. "We've been worried," she added. I looked at her, waited for the part where she'd say sorry. It never came. Instead, she told me the usual updates. My brother sold 2 more houses. My sister started a side business, making centerpieces for weddings. They were all doing well. They were trying. No one asked how I'd been. No one asked what I'd built. No one noticed the coat I wore cost more than my sister's rent. They still saw me the way they left me, small, silent, expendable. My brother came in later, laughed too loud, patted me on the back like we were teammates. "Look who showed up," he said. "Didn't think you'd come back from your little vanishing act." I looked at him. No smile. He cleared his throat. "I mean, it's good to see you." He sat down beside my dad and started scrolling his phone. "Mom says you've got your own business now, that true?" I nodded. "What do you do? Like websites or something?" "Yes." He nodded slowly, pretending to understand. "That's cool. Maybe you could help me with a project sometime. I'm thinking of starting a podcast or something. Could use some branding." I looked at him. He had no idea what I did, no idea what it took. Just heard business and thought favors. They all did. I stayed for the rest of the visit, quiet, still, didn't offer anything, no gifts, no updates, no apologies, just presence, which for them was shocking enough. They kept glancing at me like I was a ghost they didn't expect to touch the ground. Later that night, my sister texted, "Hey, would love to talk if you have time, maybe coffee?" We met at the same diner we used to go to after church. She ordered waffles. I just watched. "You look good," she said. "Different." I said nothing. She tapped her nails on the glass. "I've been thinking a lot about how things used to be, and I know we weren't always fair to you." She looked up, waiting for me to rescue her from the pause. I didn't. She sighed. "Anyway, I'm just glad you came. We've all missed you." "Have you?" I wanted to ask. "Or did you just miss what I used to give?" She leaned forward. "I heard your business is doing really well. That's amazing." Still no questions, still no curiosity, just statements meant to circle the real thing. Then came the ask. "I don't want this to be weird, but I've been trying to get a loan for a storefront. You know, for the centerpieces. The bank's being weird about it." I waited. She smiled too brightly. "I mean, if you're in a position to help, even just a little." There it was. Not a real conversation, not a real apology. Just a transaction disguised as sentiment. I leaned back, took a sip of water, set the glass down slowly. "I'm not investing in anything right now." Her face froze, then cracked. "Oh, okay, no problem. I just thought—" She didn't finish the sentence, didn't have to. I finished my water, stood up, left a 20 on the table. She didn't say goodbye. At the hospital, my father was sleeping. My mother watched me from the chair. "I think your sister was hurt," she said. "She just wanted to reconnect." I stared at the monitor behind her, watched his pulse blip across the screen. "He asked about you a lot," she added. "After the wedding. He just didn't know how to reach you." I turned to her. "You didn't try." She opened her mouth, closed it. I walked to the door, paused. She looked older now, softer in the wrong places, harder in the eyes. "I hope he gets better," I said. She nodded. I left the hospital and drove to the hotel, laid down in a room that smelled like chlorine and pine cleaner. Watched the ceiling like it might give me something to believe in. They still didn't understand. Still thought silence meant forgiveness. Still thought I was waiting for them to come around. But I wasn't angry. I just wasn't theirs anymore. The funeral was 6 months later. Spring hadn't arrived yet. The trees still looked skeletal, like they were holding their breath. I got the call from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 4 years. She left a voicemail, no hello, just, "He passed this morning. Heart failure. They're doing the service Thursday. You probably already know." Anyway, I didn't already know, but I wasn't surprised. I sat with the news for an hour, didn't cry, didn't move, just watched the steam rise from my untouched tea. Thursday came. I wore black, pressed, sharp, expensive. The kind of fabric that never wrinkled, the kind of cut they'd never imagine I could afford. No one greeted me when I arrived, just glances, some curious, some guilty, some afraid. I took a seat in the back. Alone. My mother didn't look at me. My sister offered a brief smile, the kind you give to coworkers in elevators. My brother walked past me twice, said nothing. The service was short, polite, impersonal. They talked about his strength, his humor, his work ethic. No one mentioned the silence. No one mentioned how he never said sorry, or how he raised children who mistook obligation for love. Afterwards, we stood in a circle outside. People hugged, cried, handed each other napkins. My name floated through the air like smoke. "Is that her? She looks different. I heard she moved away." "No, I think she's doing something with computers now." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My presence said everything. Later that week, the will was read. We gathered in a lawyer's office that smelled like old receipts and legal pads. My brother was confident, sat like he already knew the outcome. My sister looked nervous. My mother kept her eyes on the table. The lawyer read slowly. House to be divided equally. Savings to be split 3 ways. Insurance payout to be used for medical debt. Then the surprise. "There's also a letter addressed to Mandy," the lawyer said. He handed it to me in a plain white envelope. No handwriting on the outside. Just my name typed. Clean, unemotional. I opened it. It was short. "I never said it enough. You were the strongest of them all. I didn't understand you, but I respected you. That's why I left the cabin to you. You'll know what to do with it." My brother scoffed. "The cabin? That thing's worthless." My sister looked confused. "I thought he sold that." I folded the letter, didn't say a word. They kept arguing. I stood up, left. 3 weeks later, I drove to the cabin. It was falling apart, covered in moss and memory. The door creaked the same way it had when I was 9. It wasn't about value, it was about choice. He gave them money, he gave me freedom, and that was the apology. I turned the cabin into a retreat, not for family, for women like me, women who needed quiet, who needed a place where no one asked questions, where you could scream into the trees and no one called it drama. I funded the whole thing myself. didn't ask for help, didn't take donations. I built it with the same hands that once washed dishes for a family that never said thanks. I named it the North Room. I didn't invite anyone from home to the launch, but one person did show up. My cousin, the one who called about the funeral. She looked tired, smaller than I remembered. "I saw what you were building," she said. "I wanted to say, I always thought you were the only one who made sense." I offered her tea, showed her the garden, gave her the quiet I fought so hard to find. The next month I got a call from my brother. He left a voicemail. "Hey, I was wondering, since you got the cabin and all, and you're doing good, I'm trying to expand the business. Just need a little help. Nothing big. Could really use you on this." I didn't respond. The month after that, my sister emailed me. "I know we've had our differences, but I was thinking, if we rebranded the Centerpiece business, maybe you could design the site. Just a starter version? I'd pay you, of course. Just trying to get back on track." I archived it. 2 weeks later, my mother called. From a new number. Left a message. "I wanted to tell you, I saw your interview. You looked beautiful. I didn't know you'd done all that. I'm proud of you. I just wanted you to know." I didn't call back. I didn't burn bridges. I just stopped walking back. I wasn't angry, not even bitter. Just finished. They had their story about me. The quiet one, the helper, the backup plan. They could keep it. I had my own name now. It opened doors they'd never step through. It bought plane tickets they'd never ask about. It whispered through rooms filled with people who knew what I was worth, without me having to prove it. I funded a scholarship in my father's name. Not for his sake, for mine, for the girls like me who grew up giving too much too early to people who mistook their kindness for a resource. The first recipient cried when I called her. I didn't. Just smiled, hung up, went back to work. There was no revenge. Only refusal. Refusal to be useful to people who only saw me when they needed something. Refusal to shrink so they could feel tall. Refusal to explain myself to the same mouths that once spit my name like it was bitter. They thought I was still the quiet girl. I let them believe that as I walked past them for the last time. If you've ever experienced this, share. If you've ever been the outcast who outgrew the room, you're not alone. Thanks for staying until the end.